Welcome into another edition of Tide and Tiger. Been a while as we let recruiting kind of fester and cook a little bit on the proverbial stove. Of course, coming up Wednesday of this week, we will have National Signing Day the way it's been for years, but Alabama's only got about 8 slots to fill before they get to their allotted number of 23. Scott Griffin here with Tide and Tiger, Rodney Orr of Tide Insider with all the recruiting news, and we'll also update you on the assistant coaches. Brought to you by Kirpelani Tailors. Kirpelani Tailors in Birmingham, the absolute best place to go. Fit, fabric, and fashion. You can't beat it. We'll tell you more about them in just a moment. Rodney, what's going on? How are you?
Doing well. How are you, Scott?
Doing fantastic. And we got a lot to talk about here. You have been busy manning the phones and messaging and figure out what's going to happen in the next few days. So just give us a general overview from when we talked in December, what happened with those guys, and then where Alabama's been laying the land getting ready for this next signing period.
Well, I thought Alabama actually did pretty well in the early signing period. You know, anytime you get guys like Ayabi Anoma, maybe the best pass rusher in the country from Baltimore, Maryland, Jordan Davis, another outside pass rusher from Memphis, Cameron Letu, a guy that's can play outside at 6'5", 235, has the frame, Scott, to get a lot bigger, could be a down defensive end at some point. So you start looking at those outside guys combined with the inside interior defensive linemen that they've gotten so far. Christian Barmore, great player out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a guy that really was a fast riser, one of the top defensive linemen, interior guys in the country. You're talking about a guy at 6'5 plus, 300 plus pounds. So, has all those tools. And then also Stephon Wynn, another 300-pounder from IMG Academy down in Bradenton, Florida, top-notch interior type defensive lineman. So I think they really did well across the front.
Yeah.
And then in the secondary, I thought they did really well with Savion Smith, the former 5-star recruit who signed with LSU a couple of years ago and transferred out after Les Miles left. He went to Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College last season, and then transferred in, went through the bowl practices with Alabama, and the buzz about him has been really, really positive after those practices for the Clemson and also the Georgia game. And then you've got Jalen Armour-Davis, a guy that's highly recruited from Mobile, St. Paul's, really versatile guy, could play corner, could play safety, could play even the star position in Alabama's nickel package, and even in the dime. So, those two guys are outstanding. And then you've got Joshua Jobe, who was one of the top corners in the country. He was originally from Miami Columbus, transferred for his senior year up to Cheshire Academy in Connecticut, and was committed to Miami. Again, extremely highly recruited player as a cornerback, and he signed. So you started off really well in terms of filling your needs. They got Emil Ekiyor, who flipped from Michigan as an offensive lineman, an interior guy, could play center, could play guard. I know that they're extremely high on him. And so I think that they did well overall, Scott, just when looking at it on both sides of the ball. The key here is finishing strong.
Right, and getting that balance you talked about, filling some holes. Obviously, the secondary will be there, and that's probably still at the front of the list. I think you would agree with that. At the top of the list is the best way to put it. And to me, the most important guy out there that's considering Alabama for this next signing period is Patrick Surtain Jr. He's got the bloodlines, the genetics. His dad was in the NFL. He's the number one cornerback in the country probably. Wednesday, he's going to have a Clemson hat, an LSU hat, a Miami hat, and an Alabama hat there. First of all, do you agree he may be the most important possibility coming up? And then what do you think of where his mind is right now?
Well, first of all, I think as a cornerback and his talents, I think he's certainly a top target. Again, Alabama's recruited several elite players that I think would be important to this class, but he's certainly right up there at the top. I really don't know how you put him in a pecking order.
Right.
But again, yes, he is a high priority. I don't think there's any question about that. It certainly would be a key pickup for Alabama when you look at that secondary. And look, Scott, they're losing 6 DBs. Think about that. Alabama's losing 6 defensive backs. And, Surtain has the ability to come in, playing for Nick Saban, playing for championships, the ability to come in and play right away, possibly even start from day one. I mean, there's certainly that possibility. You have to compete and win a spot, but he's versatile. He can play corner. He can play inside at the star nickel position as well. And so, yeah, I think certainly when you talk about Patrick Surtain, he's a key to this class in terms of the close that we're getting ready to have on Wednesday on signing day. Now, what do I think he's thinking? Well, that's a great question. I mean, really all you can do is listen to your sources, kind of get a feel for things. And I think Alabama's, based on what I hear, Scott, definitely very strongly in play here. Now, there's a lot of people say, well, he's been a lot for LSU. He's got connections, and he does have strong connections. He has family that lives in New Orleans in that area. His dad, Patrick Surtain Sr., the former Southern Miss player, played in the NFL for many years, is now his head coach at Plantation American Heritage High School, has a lot of connections there, is close to Corey Raymond, the secondary coach at LSU. So there are a lot of connections. But there's also, as I mentioned, all of the things at Alabama that you look at. You're talking about Nick Saban, you're talking about early playing time, you're talking about playing for championships. And there's a lot of uncertainty at LSU. Let's be clear about that. I don't think there's any question about that. And Miami's in the mix, as you mentioned, and Clemson. So you certainly don't shortchange those schools. But the bottom line on this is, to me, Alabama's definitely in play. And I have a pretty good feel that, Surtain, his dad, have maintained really regular contact with Alabama, with Nick Saban, with the coaching staff. And I think they probably make a decision, what they're going to do within the next 24 hours and then follow through on signing day. Would it surprise me if he went to Alabama? Would not. Would it surprise me if he went to LSU? It would not.
Okay.
Maybe surprise me a little bit more if he went to Miami or Clemson, at this point. But I do think Alabama's very strongly in the mix, Scott, and I won't be surprised if he picked Alabama.
All right, so let's talk about him and then in general, just your feel. Carl Scott's the new DB coach. He's young. He's innovative. He's had great statistics as far as turnovers, which Nick Saban loves to have in his previous stops. Derek Ansley goes to the Raiders. He comes in the middle. Obviously, when you're a defensive back getting recruited by Alabama, you're talking to Nick Saban because you want that Nick Saban degree to go to the NFL, but you're also going to be coached by the new defensive back coach. So where does that play into this, losing Ansley to the Raiders and Scott coming in to Alabama?
Well, I think if you look at it, you have to understand that Nick Saban's going to handle the corners a lot of the time. So Nick Saban, your head football coach, the best coach in college football, guy who's got a great reputation going back many, many years in the NFL with his expertise as a cornerbacks coach, he's going to be hands-on with you every day at practice. Scott, we're out there, we watch it. Who's out there leading the drills every day with the cornerback? Who's throwing them the balls in some of those drills?
Yeah.
It's Nick Saban. So he's going to have hands-on with this guy. He's developed a lot of guys. You look at the success Alabama's had, delivering these guys to the NFL. Look, I understand LSU has done really, really well also. But when you're talking about the complete package of all the things that you can achieve at Alabama, I think there's a difference between Alabama and LSU. Now, again, will that make a difference to Patrick Surtain and his decision? I really don't know. You don't know exactly how important some of the other relationships are to him and what he really wants to accomplish. But I do think that Alabama offers him just about everything you could want as a cornerback.
All right, so as we wrap up the defensive back talk, who else besides Surtain is there? And Alabama needs at least 2, right, out of these final 8 to be defensive backs.
Well, obviously Eddie Smith out of Slidell, Salmon, Louisiana. This guy, I'm telling you, he's underrated. Scott, 4 years ago, when I saw Eddie Jackson's tape, Bama started recruiting him late in the process. He was a 3-star player out of Lauderdale Lakes, Florida. And I looked at his tape and I said, wait a minute, this guy's not a 3-star player. He's a 5-star talent. And we saw the success he had at Alabama, and he not hurt his knee. He would have been a higher draft choice, as you know, in his leg. He injured his leg late in his career against Texas A&M, as you remember, his senior year.
Yeah.
But how good was he in the NFL this year? He was great. And so you look at him, and then you look at Eddie Smith, and you kind of think along the same lines. Although I think Eddie Smith's more of a pure corner than Eddie Jackson. But I think the point is he's vastly underrated. There's no question about that. And I think he ends up picking Alabama. And I think Alabama gets a coup with Eddie Smith. And then there's Tyson Campbell, who's Patrick Surtain's teammate at American Heritage down in Plantation, Florida. He's very highly recruited. Scott, he may be the most talented corner this year in this class. Just talking about a pure corner, Tyson Campbell has all the tools. He has great height, the size, the length, the arms, all of those things. And I know that Alabama really wants him. There's no question about that. If I had to guess right now, and it's just a guess based on everything I've heard, I still think Georgia is probably the team to beat with Tyson Campbell. I do think Alabama has a chance. But if I had to guess as we're sitting here right now, I would think Georgia. And Miami's in the mix as well. So, we'll see what happens.
All right. And by the way, Eddie Smith, he's got some bloodlines to Alabama. Devontae Smith is his cousin. So the freshman wide receiver may can help Alabama on that. Let's talk about a couple of in-state guys changing positions. I like to start with a guy that I'm really intrigued with, Justin Ross, the 4-star wide receiver out of Phoenix City there, getting some great high school coaching. His primary recruiter, again, was Derek Ansley, who went to the Raiders, but Mike Locksley has stepped up. What do we know about Justin Ross?
Well, first of all, he gives Alabama something it probably could use, which is a little height at wide receiver. He's at least, 6'3", close to 200 pounds, around 200 pounds. So he's a physical receiver. He knows how to use his body, has good, solid speed. Certainly one of the top players, not only in the state of Alabama, but one of the top receivers in the country. So I think Alabama right now is in good position with Justin Ross out of Phoenix City Central. And Auburn's certainly in the mix. Clemson's been in the mix. But I really think that Alabama's done a great job with his family in terms of establishing strong relationships. And I think that's helpful to where they are right now. I expect Justin Ross to pick Alabama. Again, nothing's a lock. We know that. Anything can happen. But I do believe that Alabama's in really excellent position with Justin Ross.
And, of course, Josh Gaddis, the new wide receiver coach coming in. We'll talk about the new coaches as well in a few minutes. Mike Locksley, the offensive coordinator, has been in establishing quickly a relationship with Justin Ross in the last few weeks. Malik Langham out of Huntsville. Huntsville's been good to Alabama lately. He visited Auburn this past weekend. He grew up an Auburn fan, but Alabama and Florida have been distant in front of everyone. Where are we on him from your thinking?
I think Malik Langham's been very solid to Alabama for quite some time, to be honest with you, 6'5", 270. And again, does that mean that he could not end up at Florida or Auburn? I'm not saying that, but I do feel that Alabama's been in extremely strong position with him for quite some time out of Huntsville Lee High School. And you look at him, he's really raw, but he was a basketball player, Scott, so he's very athletic at 6'5", 270. You can see the frame, that he's got a lot of space to put on, weight, get bigger. I like him a lot. I think he's got a chance to be really, really good in a couple of years. Again, it may take him a year or so, but I like Malik Langham quite a bit. I think he's going to be a fantastic player, and I think Alabama's in excellent position with him.
Now, tell me, you've kind of been enamored with Jalen Waddle, who has got incredible talent when he's touching the ball. I know that the number one reason is both of you are native Texans. That's your real reason you're hung up on him. But tell me about what you see when you watch video of him.
Well, first of all, let me clarify. I'm not a native Texan. I grew up there.
You are correct. Yes. But much of your thinking is from
Alabamian.
Texas. But your thinking's Texas. You've wore cowboy boots before.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I caught a lot of flack about wearing those cowboy boots here in Alabama at one time.
Exactly.
I don't do that anymore, let's be clear. But to Jalen Waddle, this guy, Scott, when I look at him, you watch his tape, he's got a little bit of David Palmer in him, the way he can elude defenders in a small area. He can make people miss. He's got that stop and start ability that Palmer had. And if you remember, even the punt returner, Javier Arenas had that ability to stop and start real quickly. He kind of reminds me of the tape I saw of Javier in high school with his ability to do that. Now, he also has electric speed. When you're talking about the acceleration, he kind of reminds you a little bit of Amari Cooper. So I'm almost putting this guy up there and saying he's unstoppable. But
he's Cooper and David Palmer. Jeez.
Yeah. And I want to be clear. I'm not saying he's those guys, but you can see a touch of both of them in him. And I really like him. When he's got the ball in his hands, he's dangerous. He's very dangerous as a punt return guy. I think he could step in and really compete to be that punt return guy next year at Alabama and play a lot as a true freshman. There's no question. He's a slot receiver. He's a big play guy at about 5'10", about 175. I think he's the most dynamic player in the country with the ball in his hands. So Jalen Waddle right now, he had been leaning to Alabama for quite some time. Jimbo Fisher did an outstanding job of closing the gap on Alabama down the stretch when he got there. I think that with what happened in the championship game in the second half with Tua Tagovailoa, I think Jalen Waddle certainly saw a lot of potential. You're talking about Alabama had 3 true freshmen on the field as wide receivers and making big plays. I mean, Ruggs had several catches, had a touchdown reception. Jerry Jeudy had a big catch that put Alabama in good position. Devontae Smith, of course, had one of the greatest clutch plays of all time. He was on the receiving end of the throw from Tua. And you could just see, where this offense could go with Tua at quarterback. And I think certainly that's going to be helpful and has been helpful, I'm sure, in the recruitment of Jalen Waddle. I mean, you look at Texas A&M, who do they have at quarterback that can throw the ball like that? Who do they have? What kind of players do they have around them? So, again, there's a lot of factors that are involved when these guys make decisions. But I think A&M's made a strong push. I'm not saying they're out of it by any means. I think Alabama has the edge or has had the edge as we've started to move towards signing day. I feel confident about where Alabama is. I'm not saying that's where he's going, but I do think Alabama's in good position.
And Jimbo Fisher certainly knows the tricks of Nick Saban. He's going to try to sell home to this kid, be a part of, new, something special. And certainly that sounds good. It'll be interesting to see what happens on that. Bobby Brown, another one, defensive tackle, really a high Alabama target. As you know, another one Jimbo Fisher has gotten his ear. What's the latest on him?
Well, Bobby Brown, boy, he's been back and forth. He committed to Texas A&M in October, decommitted, and committed to Alabama in December, on the 22nd of December in that early signing period, but he did not sign. That was on the Friday of that signing period, if you remember.
Yeah.
He chose to wait, and he has remained committed to Alabama, but he took an unofficial visit to he actually made an unofficial visit to Alabama a few weeks ago for the parade. That went really well. His family joined him, several family members. And then he went to Texas A&M this past weekend on an unofficial visit. If you're an Alabama fan, that has to make you a little bit nervous because A&M's making an all-out push. There's no question. They're not paying Jimbo Fisher $75 million out there to lose players to Alabama. So there's a lot of pressure to make some sort of a splash here late for Jimbo Fisher in recruiting. I think they've put a lot of stock into Bobby Brown. Alabama's recruited him really hard. I think Alabama's made it clear to him he's a top priority on the defensive line. And we'll just have to see where it goes. Scott, now I'm pretty sure that Bobby Brown has given Alabama strong indications that he continues to prefer or will sign with Alabama on Wednesday. But you know how that goes. Until the ink is on the paper, it's not a done deal. So I think right now this one would not surprise me either way. If he went to Alabama, if he went to Texas A&M, would not surprise me on Bobby Brown.
Okay, let's end the recruiting talk with some other names. You got Glenn Bill out there who could be switched position. He's a tight end in high school. He's got Alabama, Florida, LSU, Tennessee, A&M also on him. Give me some other names and where you think Alabama is right now with about 48 hours before they can sign.
Well, I think Alabama actually with Glenn Beal. He's a guy that is a tight end at River Ridge John Curtis High School. It's in the New Orleans area in Louisiana. This guy, Scott, is going to be potentially a fantastic college football player. I think his best position is defensive end. I know he likes playing tight end, and he's good, and he can play that on this level. But I think he can really, really be a difference maker as he develops as a defensive end. So he's really kind of a two-way type player. You get him, you've got a guy that you can play on offense or defense and be a really outstanding football player. I think Alabama's in excellent position right now. I don't know, exactly what Glenville will end up doing. Texas A&M's been in there, Ole Miss. I know that Tennessee has pushed really, really hard with Jeremy Pruitt. But, again, I think Alabama's in good position there. Let's go back to the offense for just a minute. I don't think we touched on Nicholas Pettit-Freer. Maybe we did, but the number one offensive lineman out of Tampa Berkeley Prep. Alabama has done a really good job with him. Now, I know confidence has been high in Tuscaloosa about where they stand, but confidence has been high in Gainesville. Confidence was high at Ohio State. They thought they might be able to sway him this weekend. Greg Schiano, their defensive coordinator, has a strong connection at that high school, Tampa Berkeley. But guess what? It was announced today that Schiano's going to the New England Patriots.
That's right.
So he's kind of out of the mix for Ohio State. So I think that obviously will hurt their connection there. Notre Dame, because of their academics, he wants to go into engineering. I know that they're very, very much in the picture. But I want to say this, based on things I've picked up, Scott, Nicholas Pettit-Freer has stayed in regular contact, even over the last 24 hours, with Alabama. And that's usually a sign. That's usually a sign that he's got a high interest. Because at this point in the process, if he's staying in touch with him, that makes it pretty clear. And does that mean that's where he's going to end up? No, that doesn't, because I'm sure he's staying in touch with his other top teams as well. But I know that Nicholas Pettit-Freer is very impressed with Alabama, strongly considering them. I know that Dean Carr, the academic dean at the engineering school, did a fantastic job, with he and his mother when they came on the visit. And don't forget, Dean Carr has also been instrumental in them landing some other players. You remember Deshaun Hand when he came out of high school. He was very instrumental in helping Alabama get Deshaun Hand because Deshaun was going to be an engineering major. So with all that said, I think Alabama's right in the middle of it with Nicholas Pettit-Freer. Again, it could end up anywhere. I won't be surprised if it's Alabama. Now, J.J. Peterson, Alabama wants an inside linebacker badly. They've got to get an inside linebacker. J.J. Peterson, Nick Saban visited him last week. You remember, he's out of Moultrie, Georgia, plays for former Hoover coach Rush Probst there. All right, Jeremy Pruitt had a great relationship with him when Jeremy Pruitt was the defense coordinator here at Alabama. He was locked up for Bama until Jeremy Pruitt went to Tennessee. He committed to Tennessee sight unseen before even visiting because of Jeremy Pruitt. That's how strong their relationship was. But Nick Saban went and visited him last Wednesday. That visit went extremely well. And I certainly believe that J.J. Pruitt's given strong consideration to Alabama. But here's the deal. I think it's going to be really tough down the stretch over the next 48 hours or whatever it is now, where time's ticking down to 8 o'clock on signing day. And I think Alabama, to close the deal, they're going to have to somehow overcome the pressure that comes with his relationship with Jeremy Pruitt. So I would probably give Tennessee a little bit of an edge right now, but I do know that Alabama's been in it. Jalen Moody out of Conway, South Carolina, is a 3-star linebacker that John Chavis, who is the head coach at the defense coordinator now at Arkansas. He's a great defense coordinator at LSU for many years. He was at Tennessee where he was very successful, most recently at LSU. He discovered this guy. And a lot of schools have jumped on him since then, including Alabama. He visited here this weekend. I think this is where he wants to come. And I think that there's a possibility that could happen, probably depending on what J.J. Peterson does. We'll see. But other than that, Scott, we've basically covered everyone. I think we mentioned Jacob Copeland as kind of a wild card guy, a guy that could play wide receiver, a guy that's athletic enough to play in the secondary. He's out of Pensacola, Escambia, and Alabama and Florida are probably the top two here. Yeah. Again, Alabama's numbers are really tight. They can't take everybody, but certainly Jacob Copeland's a guy that's in the mix right now. But again, fans get caught up in it, but they can only take 8, so numbers are limited, spots are limited, and we'll see how it all shakes out.
Quarterback numbers are low. Quick thought on Brevin White, a 4-star. He's going to stay with Princeton. Brock Purdy, who Alabama got in on late from Arizona, a 3-star guy. And both guys are saying no to Alabama. How do we read that?
Well, I read it just the opposite, actually. I think Alabama made a decision probably 7 to 10 days ago that they weren't going to take a quarterback in this class, more than likely. I don't think that they totally closed the door on that thought, but I think they pretty much made up their mind that they were leaning towards taking players at other positions that they needed, because all these positions we've talked about, whether it's wide receiver, defensive line, in the secondary, they really need players at those spots. And you certainly don't pass up a guy like Nicholas Pettit-Ferrer on the offensive line. So I really think that it came down to, or it's coming down to, the needs at other positions. I think Alabama will, find a way to make sure that quarterback position is filled well. Usually you want 4 guys on scholarship. I don't know if they'll have 4, but I think they'll certainly have 3 next season. And that they went through that this past season with 3 guys. So,
right.
We'll see what happens, but I don't think signing a quarterback down the stretch has been a priority.
And finally, we wrap up with staff changes. Carl Scott is there. Mike Locksley's already been there. He's the offensive coordinator there, which makes it different. Scott, of course, is the defensive back coach. Josh Gaddis comes from Penn State to be the wide receiver coach. Both of them young. Jeff Banks, the special teams coordinator from A&M, who has a great reputation for recruiting and was tweeting out about recruiting virtually immediately that he got here to Alabama. And those are the latest guys here. So what do we know, if anything, yet, and how much will be judged here on, selling Alabama all of a sudden the last 2 or 3 weeks?
Also, I don't know, you may have mentioned Pete Golding, who was
already there, right? Yes.
Yeah, before Christmas. UT San Antonio defensive coordinator. He's had other stops where he's been very successful. He took the UT San Antonio defense from 101 in the country to a top 5 defense, which is a fantastic job in 2 years. So he's really highly respected. He also, this past season, he worked with Bo Davis, who was at UT San Antonio as a defensive line coach, the former Alabama defensive line coach, as you know.
Right.
A great coach, and Golding was with him the last year. So you look at Carl Scott, I don't think there's any question that Pete Golding had a strong recommendation for Carl Scott. And he's got a great reputation as well. Young guy, energetic, enthusiastic. Has done a fantastic job everywhere he's been. He was at Texas Tech as a safeties coach. He'd just been hired at by Billy Napier at Louisiana Lafayette as their defensive coordinator. I don't know if he was even had arrived in town before Alabama hired him. So he's got a great reputation. There's a lot of questions, so we might as well address it now about the defensive coordinator. That still has not been announced. Again, Tosh LaPoy was the co-defensive coordinator under Jeremy Pruitt, who was the defense coordinator last year. So you know that he's going to at least be co-defensive coordinator. And Golding may have a co-defensive coordinator's title. We don't know. That's still speculation. But, who calls the defense? They'll figure that out, whether it's Tosh LaPoy or whether it's Pete Golding. They'll certainly figure that out, but there's been nothing official on that. You mentioned Jeff Banks as a special teams coordinator. And he comes over from Texas A&M, where he was fantastic. Not only as a special teams coordinator, he's a great recruiter, has strong ties in Texas, all over Texas, Houston area, very strong, out west, Arizona, California. Jeff Banks has a great reputation. So I think he's going to be really valuable, in his role here as a recruiter and also the special teams coordinator. You mentioned Josh Gaddis, who did a fantastic job. He was with James Franklin the last 6 years, couple of years, I think, at Vanderbilt, and the last, 4 at Penn State, whatever it's been. Did an outstanding job as their receivers coach, developing their players there, but also recruiting. He's one of the top recruiters, has been one of the top recruiters in the Big Ten, has done a fantastic job of recruiting a lot of top players for Penn State. So I think there's obviously a lot of excitement about him. Nothing official yet on Mike Locksley. whether he's the offensive coordinator. That's not been released. We expect that to happen, though.
Yeah.
So we'll see about that. And Dan Enos, nothing has been announced yet, but obviously he's here. Brock Purdy, the quarterback prospect, visited last week, and he tweeted out a picture of himself with Coach Enos, who was a fantastic offensive coordinator, in my opinion, at Arkansas. Did a great job there developing those Allen brothers as quarterbacks.
Well, they damaged Alabama a pretty good bit over the couple of years. Yes.
They sure did.
Yeah.
They really did. And I think Dan Enos did a fantastic job. He had been up at Michigan for, a month maybe?
Yeah.
He was going to be a position coach up there, and then Nick Saban calls him. So, what will his role be here? That's not been announced. The speculation is he'll probably be the quarterback's coach and maybe have another title. But, again, until that's released, we don't know. But I think he is a fantastic hire regardless.
And so as we wrap, a lot of people are going to freak if Alabama's not number one in the country. If things go perfectly, as you said, they have a shot. But the realization is Alabama, even in a top 5 finish, it's a good year, right?
Oh, it's a very good year, very good year. Scott, back in June, July, whatever it was, you remember when Alabama fans were so worked up because they were, 65th in recruiting or 72nd, whatever it was, as we talked about it then, and everyone was, what's wrong with Alabama recruiting? We said then, we said last February that this was going to be a more methodical approach to recruiting. Alabama was going to take it to thoroughly evaluate all of their players. And, they had a fantastic, as I said, I thought they did an excellent job in the early signing period. They still have most of their top guys, they're still on the board. So they can finish really, really well. The difference between the number 1 and number 3 class, or 1 and 4, or whatever it ends up, is minuscule. And it doesn't really matter. It's subjective. It's only opinion. A lot of these guys are, how do they fit your system? How do you develop these guys? What kind of mindset do they have? Will they fit into your program really well?
Right.
Do they have the kind of work ethic that it takes to be successful at Alabama? So all of these things are factors wherever you are. And so I just think that when you look at it, it's going to be probably a top 3 or 4 class, maybe 2. Like you said, an outside shot if everything fell perfectly for number 1. But I don't understand the big deal. Some people are worked up over it, but you're not going to have the number 1 class every year, and this is certainly going to be a top class. So I think you should be pleased.
Great
but you
stuff.
do need a strong finish. I will say that.
Yeah,
I will say that.
No doubt.
Alabama really needs to have a good finish.
No doubt. And some of these newer coaches are also obviously laying the groundwork for next year's class, which is going to be big in the state, as you know, and always is big in the South. Yep. So let's not overlook that as well, and finishing with these final 8 for Alabama. You can always go to TiderInsider.com. It's only $48 a year. The great message boards where you learn a lot of information. Rodney's articles, we have video and podcast there from myself and contributing writers. It's just a great site for pure blood people for $48. Check it out there. And, of course, subscribe to Tide and Tiger on the YouTube channel and right here at podbean.com as well. Rodney and I will talk to you later this week, aftermath of the recruiting, and wrap it up and see what we got. But until then, enjoy, as we got 48 hours left here, Bama's recruiting haul for the final signing period. And for Rodney Orr, this is Scott Griffin saying so long. We'll talk to you later this week right here on Tide and Tiger.